instrument that is you. The more faithfully you listen to the voice within you, the better you will hear it sound outside. And only he who listens can speak. Dag Hammer Skolj. What is voice? The reward for working hard and long at being thoroughly human is that you begin to discover and inhabit the instrument that is you. And the gift for being an instrument is threefold. We are at last of use, we help repair the world, and we are played like a reed by the wind. Against all odds, being an instrument lets us carry truth and give away tenderness. When so deeply engaged, we become finely tuned beings. And despite our wildest ambitions, there can be no greater destiny than to convey the larger universe through the truth of who we are. Given this, how do we understand voice? Great jazz musicians each have a singular voice, uniquely theirs, and they each convey the eternal chord of all music. Likewise, a person's voice is their singular quality of expression through which the eternal chord of all life is conveyed. In the same way, a writer's voice is at once singular and universal, encompassing much more than style. For voice resides at the place inside where the personal expresses the universal. A writer can't create voice, only make space for it by being authentic and tend to it when it comes true. Walt Whitman's voice was that of a hawk gliding endlessly over a growing city. Rainer Maria Rilke's voice was that of a shaman draping a sacred hood over everything ordinary so he could watch it glow. And Emily Dickinson's voice was that of a small bird perched on a window ledge between the body and the soul. Let me offer 3 more ways to further understand voice. First, consider the banks of a river. The banks don't own the river, they carry it. The more thoroughly the banks hold the river, the deeper the river flows. The deeper the river flows, the more hollowed the banks become, until the river runs faster and deeper, carrying the silt of the river bottom with it. Like the banks of a river, we are hollowed out of by life to carry the deeper current to a greater sea. In just this way, the instrument that is you is beautifully hollowed by the deep waters that you carry. And while no one owns what flows through them, that phenomenal depth carries the silt of who are we with. In time, we become like the banks of an old, swift river and add to the flow of life without ever owning it. The sound of all that is flowing through us is the sound of our voice. Next, consider a flute played by the wind. As wind will blow through a flute propped on a hill, all there is will sing through us when we can stand firmly in the open. As we experience moment of oneness, the wonders of living ring true as they move through us. At that point, the currents of the world and live in our voice. Yet, how do we become such a flute? Along the way, we are hollowed by experience until we learn how to accept life by letting go. Then, when empty and in the open, I arrive, through exhaustion and shedding, at that place where I can speak nakedly without inhibition, like Adam or Eve, with nothing between me and the experience of living. With nothing in the way, the sound that comes from deep within me is my voice. Finally, consider a tuning fork. Earlier, I mentioned that being a poet is mostly about being an awake human being, which in turn is mostly about living each day as a tuning fork in the midst of life's current. When we can be true to our own nature, we receive the underlying tones of life. They vibrate through us into the world. When true to life, our voice becomes a tuning fork, intoning the sacred. Day by day, we are called to listen to life through the instrument of our own life. This requires an ability to follow the scent of life force wherever it goes, rather than trying to direct or bend life force. I remember meeting the Jungian analyst Helen Luke toward the end of her life. She had taken me under her wing. One afternoon, over tea, she circled a paragraph of my writing and said, "This is unlike you." I leaned closer and said, "What do you mean, Helen?" She poked her finger at the paragraph and said in the British accent, "Ego." I was taken aback, as I didn't think the passage was self-centered at all. She tapped her finger at the paragraph again and continued, "You are directing the material here instead of listening to where it wants to go. That's ego." To know our voice, we need to let life move through us and honestly express what that movement makes us think and feel. Then, we have a chance to sing the world into being, one utterance at a time, not by preaching or persuading, but by listening to life and each other, the way a flag listens to the wind. A writer can't create voice, only make space for it by being authentic and tend to it when it comes true. The quarter turn. I suddenly knew I was looking at it from the wrong angle, and I gave the cloth in my hand a quarter turn. Immediately, I saw a beautiful and coherent golden pattern. In wonder, the pattern had emerged, to be seen in all its beauty by those who could learn to make the quarter turn. I mentioned Helen Luke in the last chapter. This chapter holds another deep learning from her. The above quote is from Helen's inner autobiography, "Such stuff as dreams are made on." She begins the book with a dream in which one of her oldest friends, now gone, is asked on the other side to weave a tapestry that tells the story of her life. But as Helen looks at the cloth, it makes no sense, until she gives the cloth a quarter turn and the pattern of her friend's life emerges as plainly. Helen then offers the quarter turn as a synonym for a paradigm shift, as a way to understand those unexpected shifts of perception that return us to the hidden wholeness, the spot of grace, the oneness that exists beneath all subjects and conclusions. And like the fine adjustment knob on a telescope or microscope that brings what we are looking at into focus, the quarter turn is the skill of perception by which you can bring into focus the instrument that is you. We all have experienced shifts in how we see. It is not something to teach, but to lift up and share, to understand better, and to enlist more fully. If we want to see together, we have to understand how we see as individual spirits first. I experienced a profound quarter turn during my struggle with cancer. I was at one of many frightening ledges, needing to make another impossible decision. The tumor on my brain was pressing, and I had to say yes to surgery or chance waiting for further tests. Then, on October 4th, 1987, we had an early, heavy snow in the midst of autumn's full color. I woke that morning, tense and afraid of what lay ahead. When I looked into our yard, I saw that the early storm had brought all the trees down because the leaves, no matter how brilliant, had weighed the trees into sapping. If the leaves had to let go, the snow would have left the trees standing. This was a paradigm shift for me, which caused me to see holding on and letting go differently. I stopped trying to maneuver my way through my cancer and began to grow slim as a leafless tree. In the 1996 movie Phenomenon, starring John Travolta, car mechanic George Malley sees a flash of light on his birthday and begins to experience extraordinary moments of far-reaching perception. The first of these sudden perceptions is a quarter turn. George is planting a small vegetable garden in his backyard, which has been plagued by a rabbit nibbling at all the stalks. George has tried everything to keep the rabbit out. from building a mesh fence to putting the fence deeper in the ground. One night, he wakes with a sudden start and quietly opens the gate to the garden. Then he waits on his porch and watches. After a while, the rabbit shows and leaves the garden under the moonlight. Sure enough, the rabbit wasn't trying to get into the garden, but trying to get out. Sometimes, quarter turns defy any logical connection. As a young man, the poet Stanley Kunitz writes of being at a crossroads in life, needing to decide whether to devote himself to poetry and all that poetry points to, or to pursue a more stable career. He was walking in Pennsylvania field at dusk when, beyond all reason, he saw some geese sweep across a molded sky. Intuitively, he knew the geese were saying yes, and he knew what he had to do. When author Donald Miller asked the novelist Toni Morrison how she had become a great writer, he wondered what books she had read and what method she had used to structure her practice. She laughed and said, "Oh no, that's not why I'm a great writer. I'm a great writer because when I was a little girl and walked into the room where my father was sitting, his eyes would light up. Sometimes, the gleam in our father's eyes is a quarter turn." Two legendary quarter turns involve a saint and a scientist. The story of Saint Paul is an archetype of the quarter turn. Saul was a persecutor of early Christians until a moment of revelation knocked him off his horse and he rose as Paul, a devout follower of Jesus. Here, the shift in seeing brought something entirely new. And Sir Isaac Newton's legendary experience of an apple falling on his head opened him to the understanding of gravity. Here the quarter turn allowed Newton to see what already existed. His shift in seeing brought what was always there in view. In his searing, honest poem, New Heaven and Earth, D.H. Lawrence has a paradigm shift that is a personal awakening. It seems the very act of facing himself is the quarter turn by which Lawrence realizes that he has been so self-centered and self-possessed that when I kissed the woman I loved, God of horror, I was kissing myself. In turn, he admits that I was so weary of the world. I was so sick of it. Everything was tainted with myself. By the end of the poem, he is born anew, unsure of what is next, except that it is now real. This is the transformative power of expression. That unto itself, it can be the quarter turn that can render us more vulnerable to the mystery. Sometimes, quarter turns grow within us like seeds. During my cancer journey, I recall being a boy of 6 or 7 chasing a butterfly in a reservoir. When I finally caught it, I felt it flitting in my cupped hands, and it became clear that as long as I held it, I couldn't see it. To see it, I had to let it go. When I did, its lightness and magnificence circled me. I quickly forgot the lesson, until 30 years later, when overcome with fear that I would die, then, at last, the quarter turn came back to me. I realized that the fear thumping in my chest was like the butterfly cupped in my hands. As long as I kept the fear inside, I couldn't see it, and so I tried to let it go, so it could mix with the quiet magnificence that was speaking to me when I was so close to death, so close to life. At the end of his life, the painter Raphael Sawyer said, "I wish I had more eyes. The only way to have more eyes is to stay open to the view from all of life's positions. When we fall down, we must see from there. When lifted beyond our hopes, we must see from there. And when we fall down again, we must not forget the view of the lift. And when we are lifted again, we must not forget the view of the fallen. No one view is complete or permanent, and so, no one view is home. It's the place from which we see that is home." This is a transformative power of expression. that unto itself it can be the quarter turn that can render us more vulnerable to the mystery.